A big thanks to the Phoenix Arts Club. Let's hear it for the Phoenix Arts Club. In their bar stuff. We're hoping you can all be here till about 11 o'clock. We're going to begin the evening with, would you believe, this might take a bit of patience, but some of you are here to pay tribute to a guy who was the next door neighbour, I believe. David will come in and correct me if I'm wrong, to George Harrison in Liverpool, and he became the Beatles tour manager, like he was like their roadie, and he became their tour manager. And then round the corner in Shaftesbury Avenue, there's another building, because before we made this film that you're going to see later, which is Tales from Tin Pan Alley, which was made between 2017 and 2018, and we were very lucky to make, wow, I think we won 24 international film crests for it and 9 Best Documentary Awards between 2018 and 2019. And then, of course, we had COVID and Brexit and financial crash and London becoming very expensive. And during that time, I said to David, the film's kind of on hold. What can we do? And I was doing some radio, and I said, what about interviewing Tony Bramwell, but he lives in the West Country. And David put me in touch with Tony, and we did this Zoom radio show for Portobello Radio. Tell us about Tony, David. How did you get to know him?
Tony, my God, well, the great Tony Bramwell, friend and confidant of the Beatles, particularly George Harrison, but worked for Apple, their company, and he was mainly involved with making their promo films and all things cinematic, really. And and then, as you said, he also worked before that in the 60s when Brian Epstein took over the Savile Theatre round the corner. Tony was really the guy organising all the gigs and putting them on, and as you might have read on Facebook many a time, he'd put a post up with the Who or Cream or whoever it was. Just a little gig I organised. He always liked to say that.
Yes.
And and he's a character. I can't even remember where I first met him, but being a bit of a Beatle nut myself, and having written a book about myself and the Beatles called "It's All Too Much," if you haven't read it.
Plug.
I knew him for years, and like Tony was a law unto himself, really, and any decent drinking hole he was very welcome at, and he would have loved it here tonight. He would have drunk the place completely empty.
It was funny when we did the radio show. I think we could see one another, but we didn't do it for pictures, sadly.
No.
And all I could hear every so often was.
There he is.
As he did another Guinness.
Yeah.
And the other reason I thought was special was to say, of course, is that round the corner this was the Savile Theatre, which was run by NEMS and Apple, and it began, I think, at the Her Majesty's Theatre, and they put on the famous Motown bands, and then, of course, between 1966 and 1967, he had the debut, and I think you were there, of Jimi Hendrix, supported by Procol Harum on one night, their debut.
I was there. I saw Jimi Hendrix 3 times at the Savile Theatre. In fact, I was 14 when I first saw him, January the 29th, 67, supporting The Who. It was my first ever rock concert, and all the Beatles were there that night as well. And Hendrix blew everybody away, of course, but The Who were great. And that was the start of it for me, and I haven't stopped going to gigs ever since. So. And I'm sure Tony was there that night, of course, but I didn't know who he was, never met him until years later. But interesting you mentioned Motown, because I happened to read on Facebook last night that the Four Tops played at the Savile Theatre. But this is interesting that apparently Epstein was keen for them to play, but he asked them to audition for him because he wasn't convinced they would be as good on stage as they were on record. I don't know if anybody read this, but they did a little audition, and he listened to the harmonies. He said, you're on. So amazing story, if it's true.
Isn't that great? I mean, we've done a cut down of this radio show, and you'll see there's a card, and because of the laws of copyright and the intricacies of dealing with it, which I'm afraid I did for most of my life for a living, we're only playing about half an hour of this show. But you'll see
half an hour of Tony Bramwell, oh my God.
And some music as well. So when the music's on, go to the bar, buy a drink. If you're bored, every 2 minutes there'll be another piece of music and go and buy a drink. It's about 28 minutes. And we kept it to the early days, because he was quite, if he became a filmmaker, and as he said, and he did things like Hey Bulldog and Lady Madonna, the promos, and Hey Blackbird. Amongst many videos he did for the Beatles, but he talks quite cinematically about what it was like to tour with the Beatles in the early 60s. We won't say any more about that. And then we go on to talking about the Savile Theatre, and it just gives you a window on what it was like to be alive in the 1960s. And I think we'll come back at the end of it, but we'll hand over to my friend here now at the back, Katie, and take it away.